Something all of us as bedroom musicians have to tackle at some point is learning instruments outside of our comfort zone. One of the most crucial and often most challenging of these is drums. This is probably my most requested video topic to date, and the goal of this video is to help anyone with little to no experience in programming drum parts for their songs. If you're more advanced, you'll likely know much of this already, but a refresher never hurts, and I'll do my best to include something for everyone. To start, one of the best ways to improve your drum programming is to watch real drummers play. Observe how they physically hit the drums, approach fills, and understand how beats are put together. There's plenty of drum cam footage from your favourite bands or players out there, and I'd also recommend checking out studio clips. Just like with any instrument, live and studio performances often require different approaches, so getting a feel for both will be very helpful. This will enable you to program parts that are actually playable, which in turn makes your drum tracks sound much more realistic. For example, if I programmed a groove with 3 crashes, an open hi-hat, kick, snare and tom all hitting at once, it wouldn't be physically possible unless the drummer had a few extra limbs. In writing drum parts, I'd break it down into 2 approaches, writing from scratch and using pre-made grooves. Let's start with the former first. Once you have a part you want to add drums to, whether as a bass line or a simple chord progression, I like to begin by locking in the kick and snare pattern. I'd often separate the process into drum shells and overheads, as these tend to be played quite differently from each other. The kick and snare form the backbone of your groove, so nailing them first makes it easier to decide what to do with the rest of the kit later on. A good trick to start with is to follow the rhythm of your guitars. If you're playing straight 8th notes, you might want to go with a snare on beats 2 and 4, while your kick reinforces the accents of your rhythm. This is the most basic drum beat you'll ever hear, and while there are endless ways to spice it up, understanding the fundamentals first is key. For my example, I started with these finger-picked acoustic guitars and a clean guitar double. The rhythm here is pretty basic, so a simple straight beat should work well. Let's start by plotting out the kick and snare. I'm using a stock drum kit in Reason for this, one of my favourites for acoustic-based music. If you're new to programming drums, you'll either need a drum plugin or one-shot samples that you can place on the grid. I prefer plugins for flexibility, but it's entirely up to you. To create a beat in my DAW, I double-click the region where I want the drums to play at, stretch this across the entire section, and then double-click again, which opens a piano roll. From there, I use the pen tool to draw in notes, each triggering a different sample. Moving the note up or down selects different kit pieces. Most of the time, the kick will be mapped to C1 and the snare to D1. Some kits include additional snare articulations, like cross sticks or rim shots, but for now, we'll keep it simple and just use the main kick and snare hits. Let's try a basic straight beat, quarter note kicks on beats 1 and 3, and quarter note snares on beats 2 and 4. My grid is currently set to a bar, so I'll change that to quarter notes and draw them in. If you don't like drawing in notes one at a time, you could instead invest in a MIDI keyboard and play them in this way. Either way works, it's just about finding what feels more comfortable to you. Now, let's hear how it sounds with the guitars. It sounds pretty good to me. Normally I'd adjust the note velocities between the kick and snare, but since this song is fairly slow and only uses quarter notes, I don't mind the added consistency this brings. I want to keep the drums really simple, so the only addition I'll make for now is a hi-hat pattern to add a bit of movement to the groove. Since we've been using quarter notes, let's start by trying them on the hi-hat and see how they sound. It sounds okay, but it doesn't really add much to the groove, just extra texture on top of the kick and snare. Instead, let's contrast the quarter note kick and snare with an 8th note hi-hat pattern. Contrasting different rhythmic values is often a great way to make a groove feel more dynamic and engaging. By switching my grid to 8th notes, I can add hits between the kick and snare beats. This sounds much better to me, there's more movement now. The only issue is that the hi-hats sound too robotic. To fix this and make them feel more natural, we need to adjust the velocity between hits. In case you don't know, note velocity determines how hard or soft a sample is played back. One advantage of using drum plugins over one-shot samples is that they often include multi-sampled recordings. This means that as you adjust the velocity, the plugin triggers different samples recorded at varying intensities, making the performance feel more dynamic and realistic. You could have a really soft kick like this, or a hard-hitting one like this. Which one works best will be entirely dependent on the song you're working on. In my DAW, I can do this by lowering or raising the velocity in the editor at the bottom with the pen tool, or by using the number dial at the top. I liked the added texture of the strong hi-hat beats played in unison with the kick and snare from earlier, so I'll keep those at the same velocity and make the in-between eighth notes a little softer, maybe around half in comparison to the strong beats. It helps to randomize the velocity slightly to avoid a robotic feel, so I'll raise the last eighth note a little higher than the second. Sometimes adding subtle accents or ghost notes can make a big difference too, like placing an even softer 16th note at the start of the eighth note pattern. One quick tip here, I often prefer to write or program bass parts last after the guitars have been recorded and the drum groove is locked in place. This allows me to craft a bass line that complements both the guitars and drums, creating a more cohesive groove overall. Hopefully that gives you a rough framework for getting started if you're writing entirely from scratch. Now, if you're still not feeling confident about writing drums from scratch, need to get something down quicker, or you just want to see some grooves first to get a better understanding of programming, this is where I'd recommend using drum packs. These are pre-made drum grooves, sometimes played by real drummers on an electric kit, or created in a similar way to the process I just demonstrated. You can drag and drop them into your DAW and tweak them to match your song. The reason I recommend learning at least some basic programming is that you'll likely encounter situations where a pre-made groove doesn't quite fit. In many cases, it's just a matter of tweaking a few hits here and there. You can find drum packs all over the place. I sell quite a few on my website, or you can get them from the same developers who make drum plugins like TuneTrack or Get Good Drums. You should be able to find some free ones too. I've put together a simple pack that you can download from the link in the description. Using them is really simple. Once you've downloaded them onto your computer, create a dedicated folder. Then in your DAW's browser section, locate and place this folder for easy access to all your drum packs. I'll use some from my Japanese drum pack as a demonstration. First, I'll play you what I originally had, then we'll dig through the folder to see if there are any alternatives I could have used. As you heard, it's another fairly straightforward song rhythmically. I'll cycle through a few different options from the various folders within the drum pack and see if any work well with my track. There were a few that I felt worked well, namely the backbeat with the crash and the groove one with the ride cymbal. Backbeats are nice because, unlike many patterns, they start on the snare, giving the music a much more aggressive, urgent feel. I could even use both together to contrast the rhythms between the first and second bars. The next step I take here is opening the piano roll editor to see if there's anything I could tweak to make the grooves fit my piece better. But to keep this video more concise, I'll leave it there for now. Now I've covered those two processes, let's talk about the most important part of drum programming, how to make it sound realistic. I touched on this briefly earlier, but the biggest factor in making your drums sound realistic is getting the velocities right. Some people argue that keeping everything perfectly on the grid makes drums sound unnatural. Personally, I don't think this has a huge impact, especially if you're recording live instruments on top. There's usually enough natural push and pull to keep things feeling organic, assuming you're not quantizing everything else too. Many records have also been touched up with drum edits, even if they were tracked by a real drummer, so it's a sound we've become quite accustomed to over the years. But that's just my opinion. If you prefer nudging hits forward or back slightly, that's completely valid too. What everyone can probably agree on is that note velocity is the key to realism. Like I mentioned earlier, it's good to mix strong accent hits with lighter ones. Unlike with some real drummers, you can make these accents super consistent, which is actually a benefit of programming. A lot of drum mixing focuses on making performances sound more consistent through the use of sample layering, compression, and automation, so it's great that you can build that consistency right into the programming stage. A couple areas I just want to touch on quickly are snare rolls and ghost notes. Snare rolls can be a little tricky to program, and they're quite noticeable when they're done poorly.
Everything that we've tried.
Oh, my freaking ears!
The intro to this track has a bit of a complicated snare roll in terms of programming. I'll play it in context, and then I'll break down how you can go about doing this yourself. I'll mute the kick for now, so we can just look at the snare. The first thing I'd normally plot out when making a part like this is to again work out where you want your strong beats to land. Here it's falling at the start of every quarter note. You'll notice as I go up, the velocity gradually increases to build up the tension. Then between these I have these much softer 16th notes playing. They're also gradually increasing in velocity as the groove plays through, but at a much lower velocity than the strong beats. You can normally plot out a few of these, then copy and paste them and just bump the velocities up slightly with each pasted section. But try to keep the hits directly after the harder accents softer, as it's a better way to replicate how a human might play this part. I also have a flam at the end, which, if you don't know, is when you strike the snare with both sticks at the same time. Quite often there'll be a trigger for this, but I prefer to just drag the note slightly off the grid and turn down the velocity a little to create my own, which is helpful if your drum program doesn't have flams already sampled. This is what it sounds like altogether. Like how I said before with contrasting rhythmic values, I've also got the kick playing underneath, and it's doing a similar thing where the velocity slowly rises as the intensity builds. Ghost notes, on the other hand, are much easier to program and can add a lot of character to your grooves. For anyone who doesn't know, ghost notes are quiet, subtle notes played between the main beats, often used to add groove and dynamics without overpowering the rhythm. They're typically lower in velocity and can also be found in guitar and bass playing as well as drums. My drums from earlier, with the 16th note on the hi-hat, could be considered a ghost note. Going back to that groove, I could add some ghost notes to other parts as well. For example, if I want to add some to the snare, I could set my grid to 16th notes, draw in a note and lower the velocity. Then I can experiment by placing them at different spots on the grid to see how they sound. I hope some of that was helpful to you. It's just a very broad overview to get you started, and if you have any questions or concerns, drop them below and I'll do my best to help you out. I've put together a free drum pack for everyone below with some basic grooves to get you all going. Just follow the link in the description or pinned comment to download that for yourself. Once you've done that, you could check out this video next to learn how to write and program your bass parts alongside the drum grooves you've now learned to create.